7, although this particular room we're in, the operations room, was only manned during exercises and in the event of war.
You've only been going here now, 4 years, and this is all about activities that happened in and around Bentwaters. Do you get many people asking about the UFO incident?
It's one of the favourite topics of visitors, and it's also nice to get the stories from the ex-American Air Force people that come back. They have their own views on what happened, so we're in a lucky position. We get good feedback from various points.
I know you've got your own theory about what happened, and we're going to hear that later on in the programme. It's quite a plausible theory, so that's Graham Haynes from the Bentwaters Coldwar Museum. I'll introduce you to two of our guests in a moment or two, but it's not just me presenting the programme tonight. My BBC Radio Suffolk colleague Leslie Dolphin is in Rendlesham Forest, very close to where the alleged UFO incident took place 30 years ago. And it's a night tonight like it was 30 years ago. Clear, crisp and even. Leslie?
Yeah, it really, really is clear, crisp and even. If you could just imagine, we're standing in the heart of the forest on one of the rides. So I look up, I can see the silhouettes of the pine trees pointing up towards the skies. Bright starlight twinkling away, and the moon as well. And I have some guests with me here, some of whom have come back to this forest many a time. We have Brenda Butler with us. She's cited as one of the first investigators to break the story of Rendlesham, and I'm really looking forward to talking to her. I know she's come back here time and time again. Vince Thurkettle was the forester here at the time. Beverly's with us as well, and Beverly was with her granddad and saw the lights, and Nigel is the forester of the time. I'll quickly introduce you to them, and then we'll have lots of debate later on. Brenda, what do you think we're going to find out tonight? I mean, are you a believer?
Yes, I am definitely a believer, and I don't know what you're going to find out tonight because there's so many theories about what happened now.
Are we going to see anything here, do you think? I mean, it's so still, isn't it?
Well, I don't think we're going to see anything tonight, only shooting stars.
You've already seen one, so
yes.
That's lucky anyway.
Yes, that was absolutely beautiful going across the sky.
Let's move around here. Beverly, you're a believer?
Yes, I'm a believer.
Vince, who was here in the forest at the time as the forester, believer, non-believer?
I think this is the second biggest UFO story in the world, and it's really complicated.
And Nigel, you're here now, and people often come and walk here. We've heard second biggest story across the world, isn't it? And so you get lots of people who come and walk through the woods.
Yes, it's a very popular walk, the UFO walk, and we try to encourage children so they get a bit of exercise and enjoy it with their families through the forest.
What do you think?
Well, clearly something happened, very unusual, but I think if you like, the whole policy about it is open to discussion still, and it's a bit of a mystery.
See what you think by the end of the programme. So we're going to be talking lighthouses. We're going to talk more to Brenda, who she believes there's a specific part of the forest where I think she thinks there's a bit of a move into another dimension. So we'll be talking more about that as well. But in the meantime, back to you, Mark.
Leslie, thank you very much. At the heart of Rendlesham Forest, very close to where that incident took place 30 years ago. Well, with me here at the Bentwaters Coldwar Museum is Nick Pope. Nick used to run the British government's UFO project. This is the Coldwar Museum, and Nick, it's living up to its name, isn't it?
It certainly is. It's a little bit chilly in here, and I'm well prepared and wrapped, as you say.
Well, it's just as it would have been 30 years ago, a crisp, clear night, as it was Christmas 1980. You used to run the British government's UFO project. You've been following this incident and have done a cold case review of it back in 1994. As we heard there from Leslie's guests, it is a very complex issue, this. So many theories have been put forward. What do you think happened? Do you have any ideas?
Well, no. I think the great thing about this case is that it does remain completely unexplained. As you've said, and as has been covered in the intro, we've got believers who talk about aliens, time travellers from the future, other dimensions. We've got skeptics who talk about lighthouses and police cars. So there's something for everyone in this case.
Also with us is Terry Hunt, the editor of the East Anglian Daily Times, a local journalist for many, many years, and also very keen to finally try and find out what happened 30 years ago. After 30 years, Terry, we ought to know by now. There's no point holding any secrets now, is there, after all this time?
Well, you wouldn't have thought so, Mark, would you? 30 years ago, as you say, and it would be great to actually nail this one and put it to bed, because it has been one of Suffolk's great mysteries for all those 3 decades. And I suppose if I'm truthful, I'd probably come down on the grounded Suffolk side, rather sceptical, and but I'm entering into this with a very open mind, and if someone convinces me that aliens came to land that day, then I'll be happy to go away with that knowledge.
You were a reporter for the East Anglian Daily Times Evening Star at the time, 30 years ago, weren't you?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was working in Felixstowe, and I think it's fair to say that that Sunday morning my eye was caught by a news bill outside a newsagent's in Felixstowe which said UFO lands in Suffolk.
This was 83, 3 years after.
That was 3 years later,
yeah.
And, well, they certainly got one sale from me that day because I was absolutely intrigued by that. But, that was then, and the East Anglian started to cover it in those days. I have to say, in a kind of sceptical way, I think. I don't think it's ever been the main story on the front page of the East
Anglian. But it was the front page of the News of the World. It was the scoop of the century, wasn't it? UFO lands in Suffolk, it's official.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we took a rather sceptical view of it.
Well, tonight we're going to hear an awful lot of local opinion and thoughts on the incident of 30 years ago. And a few Saturdays ago, a special evening was held in Rendlesham Forest to look at the alternative views on what happened back in December 1980. Was it a UFO crash landing, or was it something more down to earth? I was there too and spoke to members of the public who turned up to ask them why they were there and what they thought about the whole thing.
Live from Rendlesham Forest, UFO Watch on BBC Radio Suffolk.
I've read a few books on the situation and I came to hear some other people's points of view, some of which I think were extreme, like the reptilian aliens. I think, they
You're not convinced by reptilian aliens?
No, that's kind of 1960s, Channel 4 on a Sunday morning TV, I suppose, isn't it? But
so what theories have struck you most tonight then? What do you think happened?
I think something definitely went down in the forest, that's for sure. Something had to have done. What it was, I'm still not convinced. I'm open to the idea of terrestrials, if you like, but whether it was that, I don't know. But yeah, something definitely happened, I reckon. Yeah.
What about you? What do you make of tonight? Are you any further forward in finding out what happened?
Yeah, I think it's got a lot to do with the American stealth technology, and I think really that's what's behind it. Why they covered it up so quickly, why they wanted to get rid of the evidence, and what I've read so far, I think reinforces that.
So you think the UFO story's a cover-up?
I think so, yes.
No little grey men running around, despite what we've heard?
I've seen nothing that has convinced me of that whatsoever.
What do you make of tonight?
I'm actually of a similar opinion. We've been over to the States and we've been to Edwards Air Force Base, so we do think that maybe there's some of that technology, and there's, they needed to cover it up very quickly.
But I don't think we'll ever know.
You don't think we'll know?
I don't think we'll ever know.
I mean, the longer it goes on, of course, the further away we are from finding out what really happened. So you don't think we'll ever get there?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. What about you guys over here? What's brought you here tonight then?
I'm with Steve on the theory of a military cover-up, personally. It is interesting to hear all the UFO and ET views. But yeah,
not convinced?
Not totally convinced, no.
You're nodding away there, you think cover-up?
Yeah, I agree with these guys. I think it was more terrestrial than extraterrestrial.
But you're going out on a walk now in the forest, late at night on a Saturday. You could be home watching television, Strictly Come Dancing. Yeah. What are you hoping to go and see out in the forest?
Well, you won't see anything tonight. It's a bit cloudy tonight, but it'll keep us warm anyway.
It'd be a surprise if you bumped into a little grey fella, would it?
That would be a surprise.
Live from Rendlesham Forest, UFO Watch on BBC Radio Suffolk.
So, mixed views from the locals on a UFO walk and talk. Let's go back to Nick Poper, former MOD UFO expert. A cover-up, Nick. A lot of people there saying it was a cover-up. The UFO story is a big myth, and it was designed to cover something up. What do you think?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, obviously, the military, particularly, bear in mind, this was 1980. We didn't really have the internet. There was no Facebook, no Twitter. It was a very different era. The Cold War was still very much something that was in people's minds. The Soviet Union had not yet broken up. As I say, the military, an inherently secretive organisation. So if anything happens, some of these theories about secret classified aircraft, drones, yes, there certainly would be scope to cover something up, and that would have been the default position.
So a UFO cover-up, Terry Hunt, something sinister, stealth bomber technology, something landing, crashing in the forest there, and the UFO story's a big giant hoax.
Yeah.
You're not convinced, by this alien theory at all, are you?
No, I'm not convinced by the alien theory at all. Quite clearly something happened, something quite significant, something very unusual, and something which some of the personnel who were based here 30 years ago were unable to explain, and which quite clearly concerned them. If you listen to your tapes, they're very eerie, and those guys are struggling to rationalise what's happened. But I also have experience of the way the left hand of the USAF, even on one base, often didn't know what the right hand was doing, because, as Nick says, inherently secretive, and that went for within one single base as well. So I do probably tend to lean to the theory that something was going on that maybe only a very few members of the USAF personnel knew about. Something probably went wrong, and the guys who went out to investigate didn't have a clue what was up. And I think that's probably where I'm sitting.
All right. Well, you mentioned tapes. We're going to move on to tapes, because some US service personnel who were stationed here in Suffolk at the time swear they saw and touched an unidentified flying object in the forest. Was it from another world? Was it from another dimension? Now, the alleged UFO at Rendlesham Forest was first seen in the early hours of Boxing Day 1980, and again on the next night, December the 27th. On the second night, Deputy Base Commander of RAF Bentwaters, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, was called out of a Christmas dinner to go and investigate. He went into the woods with a group of men soon after midnight, armed with a tape recorder for note-taking, an image intensifier and a Geiger counter for measuring radiation. Now, the cassette tape recording lasted 18 minutes as Colonel Holt paused the tape throughout the several hours that they spent in the woods. The tape was released back in 1984 to UFO researchers, and our reporter Jen Dale's been having a listen for us.
It was a night full of surprises for Colonel Holt and his men.
This is strange. Here, tell me want to look at the spots in the ground?
The men felt there was an eerie atmosphere, and then they saw the lights.
Within 148, we're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmers' barnyard animals. They're very, very active, making an awful lot of noise. There's been a pigmentation. You just saw a light there. Wait, where? Right in this position here. Straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there. So there it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. So you have to try to get somewhere. Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. I'm going to switch off. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees from the site. Is it back again? Yes, sir. Oh, that's the flashlight's in. Let's move out to the edge of the clearing so I can get a better look at it. See if you can get the star scope on it. The light's still there, and all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. There's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it, too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. Yes, it's bright and has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. There is no doubt about it. This is weird. Keep the flashlights off. There's something very, very strange. Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you, still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow center, a dark center. It's like a pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. And the flash is so bright to the star scope that it almost burns your eye. 305 at about 10 degrees horizon directly north. We've got two strange objects. Half-moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. Hey, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
Pretty weird stuff, really. Pretty weird stuff. Just taking that in. And Nick Pope, Terry Hunt, our guests here at the Bentwaters Coldwar Museum. Now, that tape was released in 1984, Nick. I guess you've heard that before. It's 18 minutes long. We've chopped it down. It's very atmospheric, and they were very convinced that they were seeing something that they just could not simply explain. These are trained US service personnel. What do you make of those recordings?
Well, you can hear the fear and the tension in their voices. And yes, unlike most UFO encounters, which is a single witness, this is a whole group of people, trained military observers. Two really interesting things happening on that tape. Firstly, they're taking radiation readings from the landing site, and the Defence Intelligence staff subsequently assessed those as 7 or 8 times higher than background. That's part of the MOD. The other thing that you can hear is this firing of light beams down at the ground. At one point, Colonel Holt has said to me afterwards, he said, well, was this communication? Was this a warning? What is it? And interestingly, and I think we're going to come on to this, light beams were seen striking a particular part of the Woodbridge facility, the weapons storage area.
Well, could have just been a helicopter flying over with a searchlight, couldn't it?
Well, if a helicopter was flying over, they'd have heard it.
Okay, it was Christmas, they might have been having the odd drink or two, Christmas Day night, running out into the forest, bit confused by things.
No, these were highly trained personnel, and the interesting thing is most of the witnesses were security police and law enforcement. And yes, of course, any military base like that, there were the odd problems with drink and things, but these people had to actually be tested before they signed on to duty. These guys were not drunk.
Okay, well, let's go out into the forest where those recordings were made. Leslie Dolphin is there with a group of guests. It is very, very cold in the forest this evening. It's a clear moonlit night, just as it was 30 years ago. Leslie, what do your guests make of those recordings?
Well, I have to say, just standing here in the forest and listening to those service personnel, personally, I found it really quite chilling, really, standing here. And I'm a bit sceptical. Vince was the forester here at the time. Did you just listen there to that?
Yeah.
And something must have happened, mustn't it?
I think without putting anyone down, the first thing to think is all this about amazing military personnel. They're airmen. They're administrators, they're guards, they're policemen. Being out in the forest in the dead of night is a spooky thing. And if you've come out in the forest looking for something which has crashed, you've got a bit of an adrenaline hit. And if you then see lights in the forest in a way that you never expected, you can hear the excitement. I do believe that tape's genuine. What they were looking at, we can talk about it later. But I do believe the tape's genuine because some people try and rubbish the tape. No, I believe that's genuine, and it's a fantastic piece of evidence.
And so you're not going to think it's aliens?
No, I don't think it's aliens.
UFO Watch on BBC Radio Suffolk. The radio car is out there.
We did hope to talk to some of those service personnel that were based here at the time live on the show, but they didn't want to join us on the programme this evening, unfortunately. But UFO researcher Robert Hastings held a press conference in Washington in September this year to address the vital issue of UFO incursions at US nuclear weapon sites over the past 6 decades. A group of senior US airmen, including Captain Robert Salas and Colonel Charles Holt, were there. They say that aliens have been targeting nuclear weapon sites and deactivating missiles in the UK and USA since the late 1940s. The Rendlesham Forest incident, often described as Britain's Roswell, was used as one example of evidence that aliens had targeted nuclear weapons. So is that what happened here? Talk of beams of light coming down onto the base where the nuclear weapons were stored. Well, in 1967, Captain Robert Salas was a first lieutenant in the US Air Force, based at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. His principal duty was to monitor the security of the 10 nuclear missiles that were stationed there. And he joins us now live via Skype from the United States. Captain Salas, good evening.
Oh, good evening, Mark. Good to be with you.
It's good to have you on the show with us today. You weren't at Bentwaters yourself, but you did have a similar experience at your base in Montana. Can you tell us what happened to you?
Well, in my instance, I was on duty underground in an underground capsule. I was in control of 10 nuclear missiles when I had actually 2 reports of UFOs overhead. The first one I kind of discounted, but the second one was very real. The top side guard had all his men out with weapons drawn. They were looking at this glowing red object hovering above the front gate. And within seconds of that report, my missiles were disabled or went into a no-go condition. In other words, they were unlaunchable. So, but the similarity with the Rendlesham case, I believe in both cases, the Air Force, in our case, the Air Force stated that the incident had nothing to do with national security, and I believe the British MOD made the same statement, that the Rendlesham case had nothing to do with national security. Well, in the Rendlesham case, after speaking with Colonel Holt in Washington, D.C., during that press conference you mentioned, he also stated that there were reports to him that the objects shone a beam of light on the weapons storage area. And it's fairly common knowledge that nuclear weapons were stored there also. It seems to me that these objects are simply pointing out that we have nuclear weapons. They know we have nuclear weapons, and they're trying to warn us against nuclear war.
Okay, so nuclear weapons. Let's talk to Nick Pope about this. For a lot of time, we didn't realise that nuclear weapons were stored here even. That was a big secret. So a beam of light coming down, deactivating nuclear weapons. There'll be people listening this evening saying that's just bonkers.
Well, as far as I'm aware, it's still the policy of the British government and the Ministry of Defence neither to confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons at any particular location at any particular time.
No, they were here.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. Funnily enough, we're at the Cold War Museum. I'm actually looking at a little label, I kid you not, that says "Do not discuss classified information." So even after all these years, it's still serving its purpose. But look, it was the weapons storage areas. I'm not permitted to say what was or was not there. But one interesting thing that Robert Salas said is, he said quite correctly, the MOD had said about this incident that it was of no defence significance. To clarify, that was just our standard soundbite to get the media and the public off our back. Self-evidently, light beams hitting the weapons storage area, whatever was there, that was a defence and national security issue.
Okay, Terry Hunt, what do you make of those kind of claims that it was alien technology disabling nuclear weapons that at the time we didn't even realise were here?
Yeah.
All right, he's got that right Suffolk boy look on his face right now.
I think that's a little bit far-fetched, I have to say.
30 years ago, something happened here in this part of Suffolk. What was it? Was it an alien spacecraft crash landing, or was it something a little more down to earth? Well, let's hear a slightly more down-to-earth version of events of 30 years ago. I wasn't in the forest 30 years ago, but I've spoken recently to a man who was on that very night, or that very morning, early hours of Boxing Day morning, 30 years ago. David King was a Suffolk police officer for 26 years, based in nearby Woodbridge. He was on duty on Christmas Day night and into the early hours of Boxing Day morning.
We got a call. I was teamed up in the police in the night, what we call a night car. We got a call to go and investigate a light seen in Rendlesham Forest near the back gate of RAF Woodbridge. We went there to the east gate at Woodbridge, where we were taken by the 2 or 3 Americans in their truck into the forest, and then they indicated to an area where the lights were seen and headed us in the right direction. And then we went on foot because of the undergrowth. But after a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, we decided that there was nothing, no lights were seen or anything.
So that was the early hours of what would have been Boxing Day morning. And then you got a call out later on the next day. The
next night, more or less roughly the same time, after midnight, a second call we received, another call to go to the same in the forest again, but on my way to investigate the lights, I was diverted to Otley, to where there'd been a burglary break-in.
So you didn't actually end up going to investigate the incident the second night?
No, we didn't get there. We were diverted off.
So you were there, one of the first on the scene, and did you see anything that was out of the ordinary?
No, I never saw anything at all. No, so quiet and peaceful in the forest. Not a thing or sound of anything.
There would have been a buzz amongst your colleagues if something serious would have been going on, wouldn't there? You'd have got to know, would you?
Yeah, but no, but we never mentioned it to each other. Nobody ever spoke to me and saying, "What did you see?" Nobody said anything. And again, I'd say, but it was 5 years before I even thought about it anymore myself. that it might have been something as a UFO had landed there.
There were some marks on the ground which you think were possibly made by rabbits?
Yeah, my colleague went. Another colleague who went into the forest the next morning after I turned up, called there, and he was also a country chap, a village policeman, and he said there were the indents in the ground were, to his reckoning, was that they were made by rabbits, and even though the grass had grown over, I think they were grassy patches, but they were indents in the ground where rabbits could have been there for years.
So when we look back 30 years, so many people have come up with some really wild stories about what would have happened. If something very serious would have gone on there, if someone was misbehaving or something was dangerous, there's every possibility that this would have come out much more early than it did. So do you doubt anything happened?
I can't think anything would have happened, because if something had have happened and it had all gone by the time I got there the first night, I'm sure my senior officers at the time would have heard about it from the government, and I would have been spoken to by the government or by my senior officers.
Yeah, no one officially said to you, David,
no,
don't say anything. If reporters like Mark Murphy come and see you in 30 years' time, don't say anything.
That's right. No, well, nobody spoke to me, didn't even mention anything. No, I just didn't know anymore for 5 years. That's honest truth.
Are you surprised that 30 years on that we're still trying to work out what happened there?
I think so, because there must be somebody from in the atmospherics to come down into our land to come and find us, to have a look around.
But you don't think they did it 30 years ago in Rendlesham? Don't
think so. Not with the trees, the amount of trees that's there. It's a ridiculous place to land a spacecraft in the middle of a forest.
So there we heard a few moments ago, Police Constable David King was in the force for 26 years, now retired. He contacted me, said, Mark, I've got to talk to you about this on the show. He said, it wasn't any UFO or anything like that. If it was a major incident, as you heard there, he said, my bosses would have wanted to talk to me. Well, let's go live back into the forest now, to very close to where this alleged incident took place, where Dave King was walking around with his torch 30 years ago. Join Leslie Dolphin, who's there with someone who is a believer.
Yeah, with us is Brenda Butler. Now, Brenda, you weren't actually there on the night, but you're one of the people that actually broke the news of what had happened, aren't you, a little bit later on?
Yes, I was told about it on December the 31st, and we had a New Year's party where I used to live, and one of the security guards came and told us about it. Then he came to my house on January the 2nd, and he told me more, that there was something came down in the forest. He said it was a craft of some sorts. He didn't actually say it was an alien craft. He said a craft of some sort came down in the forest.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space.
With Mark
Gosh, isn't this exciting?
You had this loom effect, which is a travelling beam across the sky.
There's been talk of everything from buried spacecraft here to shooting down of satellites and spacecraft.
He's coming toward us now.
The radio car is out there.
We're going to tell you about how the story was broken, because the incident happened in 1980, the early hours of Boxing Day morning, Christmas night into Boxing Day morning. Something happened in the forest, but what was it? Well, the Rendlesham UFO sightings didn't become public knowledge until October 1983. Now, it's a story that shocked the country when the News of the World broke the news with the headline, UFO lands in Suffolk and that's official. Recently, I caught up with Keith Beebe, who wrote the article, and asked him how he came to hear about the story.
Well, I had a contact at the time, a lawyer in Manchester, whose hobby was unidentified flying objects, UFOs as they were called. And he called me and told me about a report that had been made by Commander Charles Holt, who was the base commander at Bentwaters at that time, which was occupied by the United States Air Force. A report of an incident which the commander claimed happened just outside the perimeter fence. And would I be interested? Naturally, the newspaper was.
It's not the kind of call you get every day. A UFO lands in the UK. So did you treat it with some scepticism first of all, or not?
Our News of the World reporters are always sceptics, I suppose. Yes, I did.
And you had to convince your bosses that this was a story worth following up?
Yes, they didn't take a great deal of convincing. It was either going to be a very good story or a lot of rubbish.
So how did you take it forward from there?
I met my contact. He gave me a copy of the report which Commander Holt had made to his American bosses. I took that report down to Bentwaters. I drove on to the Air Force Base, and what I needed to do was to confirm that that report was genuine and that it was Commander Holt's signature at the foot of the report, which is what I did.
Did you get to talk to him?
Oh, yes, a very nice chap. Took some time before he agreed to see me, but when he did, I can remember his very words. He said, if that story is published in the News of the World, from now on I shall only be flying a desk.
Those who certainly went out to investigate the incident are convinced that they saw a craft, they say, not of this world. They are absolutely convinced to this very day that there was something out of the ordinary in that forest. Others have come up with more mundane theories. But you talk to those who were there at the time and they are adamant.
Yes, I believe they are. And I don't think a person like a United States Air Force Base commander like Charles Holt would place at risk his whole career by writing up a report which was a figment of his imagination.
That's Keith Beebe, former News of the World reporter who broke the story. UFO lands in Suffolk, it's official. Let's get some reaction from our newspaper man, Terry Hunt, the editor of the East Anglian Daily Times, driving along on a Sunday morning, saw the billboard, UFO lands in Suffolk, it's official. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
I was very worried because I thought I might have missed the world's biggest, or one of Suffolk's biggest ever stories. And I was very relieved when I paid my money for the News of the World to find it wasn't on my patch. I know that's the honest truth. And then I thought, well, the East Anglian obviously has been scooped here by the News of the World for whatever reason. And those were my first, I suppose, professional knee-jerk reactions. And only then did I start thinking about the actual veracity or not of the story.
Scoop of the century, potentially. Aliens landing, official scoop of the century.
Absolutely right, yes. And of course then we started following it up and talking to people like Barbara and Dot Street and various other people. But that was my first reaction, that we'd actually been scooped on, as you say, a massive story.
Well, let's talk to Nick Pope, who's with us, UFO expert. Used to be on the MOD desk when it came to looking after UFOs. That's a headline and a half, isn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, it's interesting, the Ministry of Defence policy on this has always been to downplay this subject. So as I mentioned earlier, we had this pat little sound bite, no defence significance, which we tried to trot out every time there was a UFO story. And that's what we did back in 1983, before my time on the UFO project.
Well, let's look at some of the theories. Was it an alien spacecraft or a crashed satellite, or was it just nature playing tricks? Lots of people have said to us that they saw odd things in the sky that night. Lots of lights being seen in the sky. It was a clear night then, 30 years ago, just as it is tonight. Leslie Dolphin is one of those people out in the forest for us tonight, with someone who saw some very strange things that evening.
Yeah, we've got Beverly with us, Beverly Plumbridge, who's come back down here to Rendlesham Forest. It's a while ago, 30 years ago, so she was 15 or 16 at the time. She was with her granddad, and I think you were on the Woodbridge bypass when you saw this. So tell me what you saw.
Well, I saw a huge big light. It come over us and then travelled towards the base and then sort of went over the base and then shut off.
Did you and your granddad both sort of comment on it?
Yeah, we both saw it. I said, oh, what was that? And he go, I don't know, it could have been something or going to the base. But it was the way it manoeuvred, it didn't look right at all.
It obviously wasn't just like an aeroplane or anything?
No, it wasn't an aeroplane.
What since thinking about it, hearing all the stories, what do you think it was?
Well, I think it was a UFO.
In terms of alien UFO?
Because I haven't actually seen anything like it since.
All right, well, we have some theories, but there were lots and lots of reports of things in the sky 30 years ago. As Leslie said, 30 years ago, it was as clear then as it is tonight, clear moonlit night. So what were those strange lights in the sky? Hundreds, if not thousands of people across the southeast of England reported seeing something in the skies that night. John Mason is from the British Astronomical Association.
Well, I remember that night really vividly because I was actually in bed with flu at the time, time, and just after 9 o'clock on Christmas Day evening, the phone started ringing. It carried on ringing throughout the night, because that night there was an amazing spectacle seen by thousands of people all over southeast England. What happened was a large fragment of a Russian rocket, Cosmos 749R, re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. It crossed northern France, the Channel, crossed the south coast at Beachy Head, and then disintegrated over the Thames estuary and southeast Essex. And it was seen right across southeastern England. People from Suffolk would have seen it in the southern sky. It was seen from Essex and Kent and Sussex. And it was this brilliant object travelling across the sky. It then broke up into a shower of fragments that then faded. Some were red, some were orange, some stayed bright magnesium white. And it really was a spectacular object. I only wish I'd seen it.
Is there any chance that a piece of that, a chunk of that, would have landed in Rendlesham Forest?
What is really remarkable is that myself and a colleague collected over 1,000 reports of this object, and we plotted its trajectory on a map. And the trajectory, if extended beyond Essex, would have crossed right over the Woodbridge Air Base. So if it was being tracked on military radar, there's no doubt that, if any fragments did fall from that rocket, they could have fallen in that area. To my knowledge, no fragments were ever found. It burnt out, as far as we could see, around about 10 miles up in the atmosphere. But that's not to say, of course, that solid fragments, non-luminous, didn't fall beyond that. So what is interesting is that trajectory places it on a line that would have taken it into the Woodbridge, Rendlesham Forest area.
John Mason from the British Astronomical Association talking about some lights in the sky who were very bright 30 years ago. Does that account for some of the mystery of what happened 30 years ago? Now, one of the big theories behind the strange lights seen by the airmen in Rendlesham Forest is the Orford Ness Lighthouse. Could this bright beacon be the answer to the 30-year mystery? Some people say no, can't be. Others say, well, it's got to be. Our reporter Jen Dale's been to investigate.
So how likely is it that what the men saw in Rendlesham Forest that night was simply the lighthouse? I met up with Keith Seaman, the lighthouse attendant.
So Keith, we're just outside Orford Ness Lighthouse now. I've been up to the top and can see that Rendlesham Forest is about due west from the lighthouse. How likely is it that what the men saw that night was simply the light coming from this lighthouse?
Good question. The light is visible due west across the land, but from here you can't actually pinpoint the direction of Rendlesham Forest. In those days, in 1980, the lighthouse was powered by a 3,000 watt lamp, and this was a very powerful light. The published range to shipping was almost 30 miles. And you had this loom effect, as it was called, which is a travelling beam across the sky, and I emphasise across the sky rather than a horizontal line. The airmen who actually went into the forest, it was said that they could see the light, but I've had the privilege of being in the company of Colonel Charles Holt, and he explained to me they went through the forest and they eventually exited the forest into a clear open countryside where they could see lights of ships out to sea, and also they could see 3 lights flashing. Now, I explained to him at that time there were 2 lightships off this part of the coast. One was quite close in, which was the Shipwash light, and also further out was the Gabbard lightship, and both had white flashing lights of a definite sequence, and he accepted that explanation that that was what he could see once he'd exited the forest into the clear countryside.
I suppose the one thing that doesn't quite gel for me is that, according to the Holt tapes, the lights were actually moving. Now, presumably with a lighthouse, it's a constant light, isn't it? It doesn't move up and down.
No, the lighthouse is a constant flash which is repeated every 5 seconds. The beam traverses from left to right in a clockwise rotation, and if it could be seen through those trees, it wouldn't appear to be moving up and down, but I would have presumed that if those Americans were based at Woodbridge, they would have been fully aware of that lighthouse if they could see it. They wouldn't treat it as a strange object on a particular night when they were looking for something unidentified.
Surely the lighthouse is operational 365 days a year as well?
Oh gosh, yes. It's been operational and it's been standing there since 1792, and I don't think it's missed a day yet. So it is 365 days a year, every single night.
In your eyes, were the strange lights of December 1980 the Orphan Nest Lighthouse?
No.
What do you think it was?
I've no idea.
Fascinating stuff, it really is. Orphan Nest Lighthouse is one of the big theories. Maybe a combination of the Orphan Nest Lighthouse light and the meteors in the sky from the satellite burning up. It could be all sorts of things. Let's go back into the forest and join Leslie Dolphin now, because she's got Vince Thurkettle with her. Now, Vince was the forester in Rendlesham 30 years ago, and I think, Leslie, this is Vince's big theory, isn't it?
Well, I'm not totally sure exactly what his theory is. We've spoken to you a couple of times already, and you said that the odd thing was that they saw these lights, but they never mentioned the lighthouse. So what do you think?
I think just listening to the programme, what's interesting is a lot of people saying, oh, well, they were familiar with the lighthouse and all. Now, that's probably rubbish, because I lived and worked in this forest for 7 years. There is a very small area of this forest where the beam of the lighthouse penetrates it, and it is not visible from the Woodbridge Air Base where the guys came from. And it's one of the great flukes. The airbase is, so again, the lighthouse is something like 5 miles from the forest, and in between there's a hill, Gedgrave Hill, and there's a little gap in the trees on Gedgrave Hill. So I think, like a lot of things with big mysteries, is we've got a string of coincidence. The Russian material coming in caused the impression that something had crashed in the forest. Men went out to look. They then walked by fluke into an area where the beam of the lighthouse came in, and I saw it, and it really did penetrate the forest and appear to be a few feet above the ground.
Okay, listen on, because we may persuade you it wasn't the lighthouse. I know Brenda's listening on. I'm not sure we'll ever persuade Brenda anything other than her believing that it is maybe aliens of some description or other. We're going to listen on, Mark, and see what else you have to suggest.
Okay, well, we have a suggestion that Brenda does know about. When I mentioned it to her before, she had a little look in her eye, like she thought, well, actually, yeah, maybe that's possible. Well, let's talk to someone who has lived and breathed the Rendlesham incident for the whole of his police career, pretty much. Kevin Sloan was a member of the Suffolk Police Force. He's with us here now. Kevin, you were in the police force for how long?
32 years.
And you were based in Woodbridge at the time of the incident?
Yes, I was. So I was based in Woodbridge with Dave King, that you've been speaking to earlier, and various other PCs as well. I was a PC at the time, and I'd been in the forest in the middle of the night. I've seen the lighthouse lights and so on and so forth. I've been frightened by deer that should spring out from nowhere, and all sorts of things happen, and all sorts of calls were made up here. It was a very busy area.
Okay, so what was seen and what was recorded?
Well, what was seen and what was recorded is exactly as you'll see if you go to the Suffolk Police website, where the original incident log was disclosed back in 2005, and that was that the PC the following day who went along actually went, and in fact you'll see photographs of them, I think, on certain websites, and all he saw was 3 marks on the ground which he considered to be animal marks.
Okay, 3 marks on the ground. So that's confirmed, there were 3 marks on the ground.
That's correct, and if you look on the log from the original incident log that we published or Suffolk Police published in 2005, that's what you'll see.
Okay, store that thought, three marks on the ground, store that thought for us. You're a retired police officer now, so we can take off your police hat. What do you think happened?
My own view is nothing happened. I think it was a combination of animals in the forest, and although I know the argument about the lights, but certainly the lights of the base and the lights of the lighthouse, no, I don't think anything.
All right, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Now, Chris Pennington is with us. Now, Chris, I met very recently in the forest. There was an event where lots of people came and heard a lot of the theories, and Chris bounded up to me and said, look, Mark, he said, I've got to come to your programme because I know what happened. So what happened, Chris?
I think it's all down to do with the 67th Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Squadron.
Okay, which was based at Woodbridge?
It was based at Woodbridge. Very, very secret sort of squadron. Kept themselves to themselves. Never seemed to do anything apart from be there. Hundreds of millions of dollars of stuff just sitting there doing nothing.
So what do you think happened then? You say it was involving them. What do you think happened?
I think that their job was to retrieve things from space. So the Apollo, when that was ongoing, that was their job to be there in case they needed to pick up the men, the astronauts. I think their job was to do that very same job, but without humans, and on spy satellites.
So do you think it was a spy satellite then that crashed in the forest or had a controlled landing in the forest? Because there have been reports of dog walkers seeing something cone-shaped in the forest with a parachute or a tarpaulin draped over the top. You think that was some kind of satellite?
I think that originally they brought out one which was done by radio photography. Once the Russians caught up with that sort of technology, then they had to think of something else. So they came up with the idea of actually having re-entryable capsules, film capsules. Now, somebody had to pick these things up. They came in over Norway on a trajectory which would take them right over Bentwaters but they were dropped on the Dogger Bank by parachute, hopefully picked up in the air by Hercules. If not, the helicopters had the job of picking them up.
So this thing was blown off course, was it?
No, I think that the parachute probably failed to open and it just carried on in its trajectory and landed just plumb on the end of the runway at Woodbridge.
All right.
People had seen this object, and I believe that the military had already how they were going to cover anything up which might be seen, because they would have known what they were doing. That would have been their job to do that. And every time they sent one of these 20 satellites up with the 6 re-entry vehicles, they knew exactly when they were coming down, where they were coming down, what time they were coming down, and if one accident went wrong, they had to have some cover-up ready for it if it did go wrong. It did get out, people saw it, so they had to cover it up.
Well, I'm going to bring a theory to you now. I'm going to bring something to the table, okay? And I'm going to bring Graham in. Graham is the manager of the Bentwaters Coldwar Museum, and he's got a couple of chums here who might want to come down and join us as well. They're being coaxed down here. Now, Graham, the museum's been open for 4 years. Now, you have a lot of people coming here, local people that used to work at the twin bases as well. Now, I touched on an Apollo capsule right at the beginning of the programme. Chris mentioned that there was a team based at Woodbridge that was based here to recover the Apollo capsule should it have crash landed in another part of the world other than the Pacific Ocean. Now, a lot of people sidle up to you and your colleagues here. Errol's over here, he's heard the story as well. They sidle up to you when the UFO crops up, and they kind of give you a knowing look and say, it wasn't UFO, it was the Apollo capsule. What do you think happened?
I think I'll go with the majority, because that is the most plausible explanation. The 67th Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Squadron, that, as you say, is their primary role or rather a secondary role for recovering astronauts. And for that very purpose, they had a training module called a boilerplate at Woodbridge, which incidentally had 3 feet welded to the bottom of it.
Okay, 3 feet. Okay, got that? 3 marks on the ground. 3 feet on the bottom of the Apollo capsule, the dummy one. Have we all got that? Yes, Mark. They're not convinced yet, are they?
Well, it has to be said, it is unusual for one of these boilerplate modules to have these 3 feet on the bottom, but we have got photographic evidence that was the case. It's about the same size as a lot of the descriptions of the UFO were. So it's not just our theory. It's a theory of a lot of people that visit the museum, including ex-US Air Force personnel that are based here.
Okay, so a lot of people come and talk to you and say, "Oh, it's the Apollo." So this capsule, and I've seen photographs of it. This capsule with the 3 feet on the bottom. We've got the 3 feet, haven't we? Was here the dummy capsule. And they would go around and practice, drop that, pick it up, and practice.
Yeah, they'd usually go out into the Deben or just off the coast, Bawdsey area, drop the module into the sea, drop pararescuemen down, and they'd practice recovering astronauts from the module.
Okay, so 30 years ago, what happened then? Christmas night into Boxing Day morning. What are people telling you?
For some reason, what has to be taken on board here is the 67th ARRS were not actually controlled by the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing. They are controlled by the 39th ARW, which is based at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. So the 81st here wouldn't necessarily know what the 67th were up to. For some reason that night, the Apollo capsule was lifted by the HH-53 Jolly.
Did they decide to take it up for a bit of a jolly then on Christmas Day night? Let's take the helicopter up. Let's take an Apollo capsule up.
This is what we don't know. This is the grey area of the theory. We don't really know why they took it up. But interesting that night, the first row of landing lights at Woodbridge was also damaged. So quite possibly the Apollo capsule hit the landing lights. It started to sway underneath the helicopter. The pilot, thinking that he was in trouble, jettisoned the capsule into the forest.
And then came back the following night with colleagues in silver suits, maybe, to recover that capsule?
The silver-suited people could be firemen. It's highly possible.
All right. Errol's here as well. It's a story that you've heard as well, isn't it?
It is, yes. As soon as I started on the base over at Woodbridge in 1983, the first people I spoke to, first thing they said, "Have you heard about the UFO and everything? Do you know what it was?" So I basically was playing ignorant, just saying not really. And that's when they basically told me what about the UFO, which was the actual Apollo capsule. Like Graham was saying, the 3 feet underneath. The measurements, what we've actually been given as well, match up to within 1 inch exactly of what the dimensions were on the ground, of what the boilerplate, the tripod legs were on it.
Because this capsule is now in the United States, Patrick Air Force Base, and someone's measured the feet on the bottom of this capsule, and they match pretty much the markings on the ground.
Within 1 inch, yeah. I actually got an email back last year, actually, from the guy who was actually in charge of the project. And
I think it's been removed now, actually. They've been
that's convenient. That's convenient. Okay, so at some point it did have feet.
They did have feet. It was just literally, it was just a cradle. It wasn't an actual main thing what always kept there. It was just a cradle, what they could actually use it to sit it on the ground so it was level. After the actual news headlines that in 1983, the capsule originally was always sitting outside the front of their building, where basically the public who were just around the airfield could actually see it. After 1983, it actually got moved to the back of one of the hangars, so nobody could actually sit. The public couldn't see it at all.
Okay, so maybe they were taken up just for a jolly and it all went wrong?
One of the other ones what I have heard is because obviously I think a couple of in 1980 there was this bit about it just hit the headlines that there was a satellite which had actually broken up. I think what had happened, that 67th being sort of hoaxers, which they were, technical jokers, they had actually thought that, well, we've got something what we could actually make sort of more of a UFO sort of case. And being Christmas, everybody's sort of more merry, and I think that's where it sort of went off, really.
Okay, they were hoaxers, though, as we just heard there. They liked a bit of a practical joke. I'm going to go into the forest now. Leslie Dolphin is in Rendlesham Forest. Leslie, you've got Brenda with you. Now, Brenda is there. She visits the forest all the while, is convinced that she sees creatures from different worlds, different dimensions. And I've put this theory to Brenda, and she's heard it as well from some local people. Can you tell us more?
I've heard it on several occasions, Mark, and I think we heard it way back in the 80s. And the two people who lived in the Folly House at Rendlesham, opposite Track 10, they were one of the first people to tell us that they heard a noise about 11 o'clock on the 27th, and they looked out of their bedroom window and they saw something hitting the runway light, which was like an upside down ice cream cone. And they said that one of the chains broke and the helicopter wobbled and went over into the forest and dropped whatever it was off into the forest. That was that. And
they to their dying day swore that was the case, that the helicopter was up carrying something that they described at the time as looking like an upside down ice cream cornet, suspended from chains, hits the runway lights, wobbles a bit, drops the capsule. They swore to their dying day that was what happened.
The gentleman did, yes, he did. Just before he died, he told the nurse in the care home that's what happened.
Yeah, well, that's the theory then, isn't it? That's sorted, isn't it, Brenda?
Well, Mark, hang on a minute, because if that was the theory, why did Jenny, Dot and myself go to the MOD, and they took us into a sealed room and asked us if we would sign a document to say that we wouldn't go into Rendlesham Forest anymore and do any more research into Rendlesham Forest. Now, Jenny and I wanted to know why, and they wouldn't tell us. Dot said there was no way would she sign a document, and they said it was because of the defence of our country that they wanted us to sign the document, but they wouldn't tell us why. But Jenny and I said that we wouldn't do it.
Does sound plausible though, Brenda, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I have to say, you've caused huge debate. We've been stamping around in the cold here, listening to all your arguments, and Vince is not convinced at all. I mean, he was here at the time as well.
There were many whispers in the forest straight after the alleged incident, but mostly about a burnt area. But one of the things that's quite important when you've got very, very few facts is that there was no crash site. People have said to me the trees were damaged and
yeah, but Vince, there were 3 marks on the ground that matched the capsule.
I don't believe anything crashed in the forest, nor was dropped in the forest.
What about the 3 marks on the ground, though, Vince?
They were rabbits.
But you you have told me that people did investigate. There's something happened and there were investigators.
No, this is at the time it was really exciting. Straight after the event, I was out chopping wood one morning and a car pulled up. 2 young men got out, English, wearing suits, very polite, asked me if I'd been out, said there was a report of red lights in the forest. Had I seen anything? No. And then they went, and I thought, well, they're reporters, something will come out in the EDP, or so. Oh, I'm on the wrong side of the border there, aren't I? The East Anglian Daily Times. And nothing did, and I thought, I wonder who they were. And I later found out they'd visited everybody. Now, the critical thing about this is weeks before the Colonel Holt's memo. So somebody was quietly looking into this immediately afterwards, and they were British, long before Holt's memo, long before the rumours really got going. But stamp on the crash, the trees were not smashed. There wasn't a big depression in the ground. I don't believe bits of space junk or indeed Apollo bits were dropped in this forest.
All right, that's interesting. Not convinced, Vince Thurkettle. One little bit there. Nick, the Apollo capsule, the boys here at the Coldwar Museum hear this story umpty times over. It's far more than a single source.
It's a very interesting theory. I think the two very brief problems. Firstly, none of the military witnesses that I saw the UFO saw or heard a helicopter. Secondly, if you're doing a cover story, the one thing you don't do is UFOs because it ends up on the front page of the...
Hoaxes that we were told there from Errol, they're hoaxes, that lot.
Well, there is a culture of practical jokes in the military, but, I think we'll still be debating this 40 years on.
So you're going to come back in 10 years, eh? You don't think we've sorted it?
Not quite, no.
All right. Terry Hunt, what about that theory? Look, what about that theory of a helicopter, Apollo capsule, upside-down ice cream cone, couple who lived in a cottage nearby, saw that, other people have reported it here, you've heard it, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the closest we've come. It has some flaws which have been pointed out, but I think that's a sort of 7 out of 10.
OK, Nick, what would you give it?
5.
5? Only a 5? Come on! What do you reckon then? Finally, because we've had lots of people tonight, we're running out of time. What do you reckon?
No, MOD's conclusion, unexplained. My conclusion, it's not explained.
OK, but that's handy, though, to keep the mystery going, and it keeps you on visits to Suffolk, which is a lovely county to come to, doesn't it?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm always on the fence. Look, I worked for the government for 21 years.
And you might have still signed something that...
it binds me for life, but this is a mystery. It's an intriguing theory, but I don't think we've quite cracked it.
All right, well, Graham, that's the theory that we're putting forward. I would imagine message boards around the world will be picking up on this programme and this story. You've heard it from several people. Thanks ever so much for hosting us tonight. And it's been a real joy to come here. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Terry Hunt from the East Anglian Daily Times, Nick Pope, all of our other guests. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you to Jen and everybody who's worked on the show. That's it. This was Rendlesham Revealed.
Rendlesham Revealed was produced by Jen Dale and presented by Mark Murphy and Leslie Dolphin.
On 95.5,
95.9,
103.9
and 104.6 FM.
BBC Radio Suffolk.